And of course, in this regard, one temptation or genuine conundrum question is the difficulty of forecasting. So, what field requires immediate attention, or generally, what is the immediate visible deliverable in any research? So there is a concern that people are doing researchers which are only producing mathematical models and papers, 3 papers per year, but nothing coming out. So they get promoted, they get money, they get all kinds of recognition, but nothing happens on the ground. So one answer to that question and that kind of stance is that research is research. So the importance is to nurture that culture. So it itself means that so you should not be too worried about immediate fruits. So then people who come to the research field itself otherwise wouldn't have come here. If they are so worried about finding some immediate answers for immediate problems, they would have gone as say software professionals or as engineers in some production centers and all that. So once you come to research, that is the mentality you should have, that so we have to find out things, and the usage is part of the finding. So that may not be immediately visible. That is another question. So what are the usage? But it's research is unraveling the things that are hidden. So we should not we should have that kind of a mentality to look at research as research, and to be able to disassociate research from immediate deliverables. So every time you direct the telescope to the sky or the microscope on the slide, you don't ask, okay, what will be the immediate outcome? Where will this lead to? Where is the pot of gold at the end of this rainbow? So in most cases, deliverables may not be seen immediately. So as they say, time will tell. So for instance, so what is a great immediate benefit you get by finding out uh, the reason for why the sky is blue, which Raman did, is famously called as a Raman effect. So at that time, so that was a phenomenon that he found as an interesting question as to be answered. Now, so people know after so many years that it has some relevance for some of the most important things we keep talking about every day, like fiber opticals and all that. So which so Raman couldn't have thought about fiber opticals at that time and be expected to do research, because after 30 years, 40 years, this will be this enormous field in which this will be of enormous importance. And also, like when you do certain researches, like so you do for certain things, but you get some unexpected spin-off. So that way it will come. So you just do the research. So for instance, the CERN, so European Center for Nuclear Research, which is doing the most esoteric kind of research, splitting atoms, the huge collider experiments and all that under the ground somewhere near Geneva. So one of the spin-offs from that was, like, for instance, what we call the PET scan, positron emission tomography. So they didn't do the colliding of the particles to produce this particular thing, which is so important in medicine today. So there can be unexpected spin-offs. So research should go on as research, and so therefore we should create enabling conditions. So so talking of research enabling conditions, so if you take the case of Ronald Ross, it's a very illustrative example. Someone, so it's actually a very opposite example. So someone who was often discouraged, so he was often reminded that he was an IMS officer. So whenever he wanted furloughs, what we now call sabbatical, this break from work, so he was given, but with a much great struggle and petitioning. So that's why it said he won more against the odds than due to any encouraging or pats for an research he got. And later, when it came, when researchers mattered to actual groundwork, so for instance, he worked on malaria, and so there were discussions about malarial policies. For instance, an entire conference was called in Shimla, in the early 1900s to discuss practical measures. And such a man who did so much work and in the periphery and got the highest possible recognition for anyone in science, the Nobel Prize, and that too quite early on in the very second year of the introduction of Nobel Prize itself. He got it working here under such great difficulties and in spite of not so encouraging situations, that this man who did work on malaria was actually kept away from, marginalized from these practical discussions on malaria control, because he held uh, uh, the kind of positions which were not too much to the liking of the colonial state. So, for instance, between the quininists and the opportunists, he was on the opportunist side. He wanted more things to be done, especially with regard to eradication of mosquitoes and all that, which again are very costly things which the colonial state would not like. So, this is what happened to someone who had accomplished so much, and after all, he was a British. To him itself, this can happen, which also happened later to Indians. So, for instance, again, to take the case of J.C. Bose, so he also had difficulty in getting furloughs and all that. But in this case, there are other mitigating factors. For instance, once he started making waves, so literally, of course, he also produced microwaves, the waves of the shortest wavelength possible at that time. So, in both figurative and literal sense, once he started making waves, especially in the international world of science, then he was seen as a kind of another emblem of the rich fruits of the good work done by colonialism. See, we have produced a great scientist of some great worth. So, we are not just exploiting. So, we, with our whatever education and whatever openings we made, so we were able to produce something of this from ordinary colonial subjects. So, therefore, they felt sometimes positively disposed to encourage some of his researches, but otherwise, so the condition was not very encouraging even for a British scientist like Ronald Ross. In today's context, so there may not be any wanton cases purposely denying an opportunity or slighting someone like Ross was slighted. It's possible due to some internal department, university politics, and other such things in certain institutions. But by and large, they won't wantonly deny. But then there are other problems that lie on the way of the say professors or others working in institutions, like the need to commit time to administrative tasks, teaching tasks, and other such work. And the one of the enabling things that the concerned institution administration can do is to create the kind of right kind of balance, so that they are not taxed with too much administrative work, or they are given liberal sabbatical, other such such things. So the national government may not create those kinds of hurdles as or have that kind of general indifferent inimical attitude to research. So, not being like that is not enough, but should also create these kinds of factors according to the current situation. One of the other important issues with regard to the colonial context was the distance between research and people. So, distance in several senses. One is the physical distance. So, as we saw, most of these labs where high quality cutting edge research on malaria parasitology was done. They were all away from the away in the hills, and away also from the in the other sense, away from the practical concerns. So, they were not very directly of help in dealing with the relevant diseases, and away from people's reach. So, for instance, many of these laboratories did not have access to patients, unlike a medical college, because having patients is actually an advantage to actually understand in greater depth and variety the kinds of the nature of the diseases that they are working on. And it's was also away from the potential young researchers who could have probably benefited, and this is particularly so because the research centers were also away from universities which are underfunded, and these are the places, universities are the places where you find the young minds, potential bright young minds, apart from the faculty and professors. So now coming to the current situation, so this can very much happen, this kind of distance can happen in current scenarios. So there is a definite merit in having some isolated centers, some undisturbed atmospheres without too much of day-to-day pressures of teaching and dealing with students and other such administrative work. But even for such centers, there is a need, a constant need to seek their relevance. Of course, you don't ask them every day on a daily basis, how is ISRO relevant? How is this lab? How is TF relevant? You not ask it on a daily basis, but from time to time you have to keep asking. So, what are they doing for the country? Of course, we do recognize they are doing research, which may in the short or long term be helpful, but still it's good to see that they are not too distant from the people and their concerns. And one other useful lesson from the colonial case was that, so in spite of the distance at which some of these centers were placed, the staff of those dedicated research institutes did go and teach undergraduates in nearby colleges. So today also, so even if there are centers which have to be isolated and free from these kinds of works, so let them be there, but once in a while let their expertise be available to students, budding young researchers who are in universities and other such fields, colleges. Yet another aspect in the colonial scenario is the role of private and commercial organizations and the role of philanthropy. So, the role of philanthropy at a broader level beyond just research is discussed in a separate lecture on medical philanthropy. But here, so we can mention about the few examples. For instance, the Indian Research Fund Association, so which, as we saw, is can be considered as a precursor of ICMR. So this fund had substantial contributions from private individuals. The Pasteur Institute in Kunnur, it also had substantial initial funding from an American philanthropist. So some of Rose's work on malaria was funded by the planting community, that's the plantation owners, the Upasi, the United Planters Association of South India. Kala-Azar research, as we saw, was supported by tea planters. Hookworm research, there was considerable interest shown in it by the jute industry. And not only here, so even in England itself, the Liverpool School for Tropical Medicine was funded to a considerable extent by the mining lobby who had interest in it. So, all of this go to say that there is, so going back to where we started, so there is a lot of rich interplay, a lot of fruitful possibilities between research and practical requirements. So, in fact, these practical requirements, as we discussed, can actually guide research in terms of giving research problems. Sometimes people have that intention to research. I want to do quality research, but I just don't know what I want to work on. And of course, the supervisors help. That's one of the important roles of the supervisors. But another way you can find research problems is like people from the practical world, from the industry, or from particular fields like agriculture. Say the government can come up with some kind of issues related to sanitation or some other municipal work about avoiding manual scavenging. So those can be real research problems. So and there, of course, as I use the word that practical demands can drive research, but the only thing to be careful is that they shouldn't be driving too much. So too much of instrumentality and too much of vested interest. So there should always be that balance between research and always looking for immediate results. And also there should be a balance between how much of this is driven by private interests or commercial gains. So there should be a happy play. So research should also happen just because of the sheer love of knowledge, and not necessarily always prodded by these kinds of considerations. So this is something I think which all of us will contend with in our life, and hopefully the several points that cropped up in the colonial case can continue to help us at the individual level and at the national level as well, and the societal level as well. So on that note, we will close this tutorial lecture. Thank you.